special meeting of the School Board of Charlotte County is called to order. Please stand and join us in a pledge to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We are pleased that you have come to observe our interview with Superintendent Candidate Dr. Doug Whitaker, who is presently Charlotte County Public Schools Assistant Superintendent for Learning. Board members tonight will ask questions alternately, and we will be using a timed agenda. Debbie Anderson very kindly volunteered to work as our timekeeper here. And we're going to cover the following subject areas: values and ethics of leadership, management, which includes facilities, operations, and finance, student achievement and instructional leadership, planning, communications and community relations, and employee relations and human resources. And we invite you to stay after the meeting. We'll have a brief reception back in the back room there, and you can talk with Dr. Whitaker at that point if you would like. And then he is going to have dinner with the Administrators Association representatives from that group. Next week, just so that you know of what the process is, next week on Monday and Tuesday, the board will be conducting one-on-one interviews with the two candidates. And we appreciate very much your interest in this process. Dr. Whitaker, do you have any questions before we begin?
Just a note of thanks for this opportunity. I appreciate your confidence in me as we've gone through the application process, getting to the point of being a finalist, and I'm honored to be on your list.
Thank you. Board members, any questions? When you have 3 minutes left in your 15-minute time period, Debbie will hold up a yellow card, and then when time's up, the red card. Okay? And we will begin our questions, and first is under values and ethics of leadership. In your experience, Dr. Whitaker, what are the most important qualifications for a superintendent, and which of those are most important to possess at the outset, and which can be learned or delegated?
I think some of the most important qualifications / attributes are visionary leadership, passion with humility, what we know from Jim Collins' work as level 5 leadership, being passionate about the vision while leading with personal humility, in this case in the district. Strong, very strong interpersonal skills, being able to create relationships with staff across all of the staff lines. Effective communication skills, that being both interpersonal communication and system communication. Good organizational skills, and the knowledge of student learning, law, finance, management, facilities, the nuts and bolts part of the organization. I believe that visionary leadership, passion and humility, strong interpersonal skills, and good organizational skills are essential from the beginning, critical from the beginning. Without those, I don't believe a superintendent would be able to establish within the organization the culture or the ethos necessary to move the organization forward. Those are critical at the beginning. The skills that can be learned, I think people can learn to become effective communicators if they don't begin at that level. They can learn good organizational skills or have staff around them that is well organized and can support them. And you can acquire a learning of some of the more peripheral areas of law, finance, facilities, and have knowledgeable staff that support you in those areas. As far as those things that can be delegated, to some degree, you can delegate knowledge of facilities, knowledge of law. I don't think I have to be an expert in building. We need to have experts on staff that are trustworthy. I don't need to have an expertise in law. We have attorneys that have that expertise, or in finance, but I need to have a working knowledge of those areas and a basic understanding of how those work. So those can to some degree be delegated. Effective communications, while interpersonal communications cannot be delegated, I think system communications, again, if you have an expert in the area of communications, that person can carry that to some degree. Good organizational skills cannot be delegated. They can be learned, but you really can't delegate organizational skills.
Okay, thank you. The next question would be to describe a situation in your work where you observed effective leadership demonstrated and one where you observed ineffective leadership demonstrated.
Okay. Probably the most effective leadership I've seen demonstrated, especially on a large scale in a critical situation, was the Hurricane Charlie recovery. Dr. Gaylor's leadership was very clear. While he was inclusive in the decision-making process, there was no question who was in charge, who was to communicate with the media, who is to ultimately make the final decisions. And at that period in time, it really was important that strength in leadership emerge to rally the forces, keep everyone focused. And that effective leadership was focused. There were clear priorities. We had to get the kids back to school. We had to get our employees paid. And while we were doing that, as possible, we tried to help the community with the delivery of some goods and services that may not have been available. During that period of time, while hampered by limited communications from a infrastructure perspective, there was very good communications internally among staff. So those interpersonal communications worked very well during that period of time. And finally, the effective leadership was culminated in the celebration of success. We got our kids back to school. We got our employees paid. We got the kids back into relocatables. We built our buildings, and we've had significant successes along the way. From beginning to end, highly effective leadership that brought us to that point. On the other hand, I've seen ineffective leadership demonstrated on a number of occasions, but the one that is clearest in my mind was one that occurred in the 1991 recession, where in the work environment I was in at the time, we were really uncertain who is calling the shots, which of these superintendents or assistant superintendents. We were getting messages from different people taking us in slightly different directions. It ended up almost with a every person for themselves kind of mentality. There was professional cannibalism going on, people suggesting that other people's jobs, other people's departments, other people's roles be diminished or eliminated while protecting their own. Communications were spotty, poor, and inconsistent, and there was a lot of finger pointing and blaming. It led to significant morale problems, confusion, and inconsistencies in how we dealt with that recession at that point of time.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And finally, in this category, what do you see as the three most significant contributions made to education in the last 5 years, and why?
Are these my contributions or our contributions?
I would say in general.
In general?
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to focus on contributions here in Charlotte,
Okay.
in which I had a part.
Okay.
The first, and I think the most significant contribution in the last 5 years has been the development of our partnership and our partnership councils, partnership performance councils, initially at the district level. And that was something was started conceptually long before I came. I know the board was moving in that direction. Unions were already working on sort of an interest-based kind of approach to bargaining. Clearly, when Dr. Gaylor came, he was charged with moving that whole piece forward, which he did. That emerged when Tom Young was assistant superintendent, Dr. Gaylor was superintendent. We started our first partnership council. That matured around the event of the career ladder discussion. That was sort of our first task. We took that piece and really discovered through that process the power of working together, because we came up with something that few of us thought would really be possible at the beginning, and we reached agreement around it. Unfortunately, the state withdrew its funding of that project the year after, but we learned from that experience that this partnership thing really could work and could work well. That was the springboard into the formal Partnership and Performance Council as we know it today, that has then matured since then and has given birth, offspring, into school-based PPCs, which only added to the power of the partnership. Since then, we now also have started the support level PPCs, which are emerging as we speak and will continue to emerge around the district to different levels of implementation through the summer and into next fall. That impact I believe, has been huge in sending a message throughout the district that we as district leaders want to literally partner with our employees to make important decisions, not just to resolve problems, but to create innovative solutions before problems even arise, which leads me to, I think, is the second significant contribution that has been made in the district, and that came from a team of folks, particularly, again, through the PPC, but with subcommittee work, and that was the development of our CAPE program. And CAPE we rolled CAPE out about 3 years ago, had a handful of teachers start. We're now into the hundreds of teachers that are taking CAPE courses, and is really unfolding to be a major motivator in professional development. It has increased the quality of our professional development. It has focused on district priorities, and I believe as we continue down this road, we will see that it has an impact of helping our employees, teachers, emerge as leaders in their fields. We also now have, with Bobby's support and CCSPA leadership support, begun the CASE program, Charlotte Academy of Support Employees, that is now officially launched. We had organizational meetings, informational meetings. We are on the threshold of posting our CASE courses and allowing folks to sign up for courses. We actually have a meeting tomorrow, tomorrow, to create a greater list of courses that will be offered through CASE. So that's yet another end result of the whole CAPE initiative. And then finally, third significant contribution, is really just emerging, but we're seeing some real power behind it, and that is the CAST program. And the focus of CAST program is to be able to provide ongoing support, just-in-time professional development, delivery of professional development support, and modeling in the classroom for teachers. And our research is emerging that shows that professional development in the future will be the effective professional development in the future will be the professional development that we bring to the teacher in the classroom, provide the support, the modeling, and the feedback. So the PPC, CAPE and CASE, CAST are all significant, I believe, really significant contributions. And I've been privileged just to be a part of that whole thing. That it wasn't any one person's idea. That's what makes it really so cool. It was a synergistic approach. We came up with something that no one person would have come up with.
Great.
It was really exciting.
Okay.
And we beat the red flag.
And we did. Okay. All right. Well, next we have the Division of Management, Facilities, Operation, Finance. Mrs. Rendell.
Thank you. Dr. Whitaker, what are your budget priorities in the areas of academics, facilities, technology, and salaries and benefits?
I'm going to prioritize the areas too. So inside of those areas, I'll give what I see as the priorities, but I see those areas in my mind prioritized as academics, salaries and benefits, facilities and technology. I would clearly put them in that order. Academics, because we are first and foremost about student success. Absolutely job one. Salaries and benefits second, because we really need to take care of our employees. If we don't, we know from our 7 Habits training, it's easy to kill the goose. We don't want to kill the goose. Third is facilities. We know how important it is to have clean and efficiently operational schools, or schools that operate efficiently. It's nice to have the new ones. It's terrific, but we have to maintain the old ones. And then technology is the fourth area. Not that it's not important or not a priority, but it ranks fourth on my list. Under academics, top priority is class size. We have to deal with that. Penalties are significant, substantial if we don't. I believe we need to do everything we can to keep the arts and wellness in our schools. School systems are abandoning those programs left and right because of the economic situation. And my fear is that if they go, it's hard to bring them back later on. And those are the programs that are crucial for kids, not only to be well-rounded adults, but it keeps some of our academically neediest kids coming to school. It's where they hang their hat when they come. Third priority under academics is ongoing really good first-rate research-based professional development, and then making sure that our teachers have appropriate instructional materials in the classroom. Under salaries and benefits, top priority is to find a way to increase employee pay. And pay not because it's a step, but pay because we've asked our staff to take on additional responsibilities over the years. I think the right thing to do is to provide remuneration for that. We need to rein in our insurance costs. I believe we're on the right road to do that. We need to continue to find ways to make our insurance more economic and more affordable. We need to find savings by creating efficiencies and allocations. And again, we have a budget advisory task force, superintendent, staff, principals. We're all looking at how do we create efficiencies within the organization without lopping off an arm or a leg or some vital organ. We don't want to cut positions, but we want to find consistent efficiencies, perhaps in days and hours worked. Facilities, our top priority right now is to get Lemon Bay and Meadow Park off the ground, and do that while we maintain all of our other facilities at a high level. And in technology, we need to ensure that the current infrastructure is well maintained. What we have has to keep working. As we can, we need to replace outdated technology. We need to provide professional development for the new Focus program, and as we roll out new technologies in our schools, example being Promethean boards. So those are the three priorities under the technology piece.
Thank you. Question number 2, how would you determine Charlotte County's budget priorities?
I think the creation of the new Budget Advisory Committee, the committee to advise the superintendent, is a really positive first step in helping the district shape their priorities. It's a cross-representational group of all of our employee groups that sits to identify what are our priorities and expenditures, where can we find efficiencies and cost savings, and where might we look for new or additional revenues. So that group in and of itself is going to be helpful in helping us with that. I think we need to listen to our building leaders and really seek to understand what their priorities are, so we do not make decisions that have an adverse impact on learning. So our principals are going to be key in helping us determine our priorities. Superintendent staff is sitting in a unique position because it has a very global view of the district and has around that table all of the critical functions of the district support, school support, budget, finance, learning, and human resources. So that group really needs to be the group that listens to the principals and listens to the Budget Advisory Committee and pulls those recommendations together. The other group that needs to help determine the priorities is the school board. And the superintendent needs to give a careful ear and understand from the board's perspective what are those things that are really important to the board.
Thank you. And the last question, describe when you have had to make a significant, perhaps even unpopular budget cut. Describe the process you followed for this decision and its implementation.
Fortunately, since I've been in Charlotte, I haven't had to make any significant or unpopular budget cut, at least not to this date. We've made some cuts, but we've managed to get by with what I would consider to be significant. So I have to go back to my prior experience in another district. And in that district, we had 9 curriculum coordinators when I was the director of curriculum. In our budget woes of the late 90s, wasn't a true recession, but it was a downturn for a couple of years. I was instructed to eliminate 7 of the 9 curriculum coordinator positions. That was painful, and it was very, very difficult. We had to make decisions on if we were going to cut those 9, how did we do that? Who got cut, and how would we cover the services that were currently being provided by the department? And should we have 2 super coordinators that one took 5 areas and one took 4 areas? How are we going to do that? So as we worked through that process and talked with teachers and principals and the curriculum coordinators themselves, we determined that we still needed to heavily support mathematics and language arts reading. We kept those two coordinators. I went back to the district, to the superintendent, and requested that we take what was left of one of the other positions and hire teachers that would become subject area specialists, and they would get a supplement for their position. So we had a social studies teacher that took on social studies, a science teacher, science, health would take health. They got a $3,000-$4,000 supplement, and they provided support to the teachers in their subject area, basically after hours, during the summer, those kinds of things. It wasn't pretty, but we had to do it. And it was painful, and it was unpopular. But we made it through.
Thank you. It was my questions.
Yes.
Okay, next is the subject area of student achievement and instructional leadership, and it's Mrs. Miller.
Yes. Dr. Whitaker, the first question has 4 parts to it. What type of programs have you found to be the most effective in improving student learning? What makes them effective? How do you evaluate effectiveness? And how do you communicate effectiveness to stakeholders? And number 1, what types of programs have you found to be the most effective in improving student learning?
The programs that seem to be most effective are, and this should not come as a surprise, are the ones that are research-based. There's some history and background, not because somebody likes it or they think they're cute or, gee, my kids loved it, but programs that have had third-party or external research that has validated the impact that those particular strategies have on student learning. Example being Marzano's effective classroom strategies. Classroom walkthroughs has been validated as an effective strategy, not from a teacher's perspective, but from a leadership perspective in curriculum monitoring. The research in recent years on differentiating instruction has matured and is very solid, as is the research on teachers using data to make instructional decisions in their classroom. So those are all examples of solid research-based strategies that do work. What makes them effective? I think a number of things make them effective. From one perspective, Marzano's strategies in particular are strategies that are motivating to kids and require students to think at higher levels on Bloom's taxonomy, higher order thinking. So they move the child's thinking away from factual recall or comprehension to synthesis and evaluation, analysis. And as kids move up on that continuum, they think at higher levels, they think more creatively, they think more critically. They also retain their information longer. So that's an example of an efficient or an effective instructional program. From a research base, the classroom walkthroughs and the data to drive instruction is effective because it gives teachers information about what's actually working in their classroom. Mm-hmm. So the data from the walkthroughs identifies, what's being used in the classrooms, and the data from student learning gives teachers feedback. Have the strategies I've been using these last few weeks actually resulted in my kids acquiring the knowledge or the skill that I taught them? If the student results are high, then what I've done is worked and worked well. If they're low, then I have to go back and really think about what it is I just did and how I need to do that differently. Do I need to reteach it? Do I need to use different materials, take a different approach, use a different assessment? So those particular approaches are effective because they make teachers think about what they've been doing, reflect on their own teaching. The third area was how do we evaluate effectiveness? And the evaluation piece on that, teachers can use tests, quizzes, models, projects, portfolios, performances, written reflections. The array of assessments are endless. And hopefully that array is used. Teachers use multiple sources of data to determine whether or not those strategies that they used were actually working with their students. And then finally, how do we communicate this? Multiple ways. The traditional way of through report cards, in part. We have Parent Link, where parents can check on their students' progress. Notes home to parents are effective. Parent conferences. We have an emerging trend in our elementary schools of having student-led conferences, where the students actually invite their parents to come to a conference. Those conferences are supervised by the teachers, but the students actually sit with their parents and they talk them through their data notebooks and explain how they're doing and how they know how they're doing and why they're doing as well or as poorly as they are. So we have a number of ways of communicating that out.
Okay, thank you. Second part, how have you identified underperforming schools, if not simply test scores? What specific role have you played in turning around underperforming schools?
Test scores are a vital sign, and usually one of the first red flags that a school is underperforming. But you also have parent satisfaction surveys, student surveys, even community word of mouth. Parents and community members usually know when there's something wrong at school from an achievement level. But again, test scores are a highly reliable and valid way of making a determination as to whether or not a school is underperforming. My role has actually, there have been 3 times, and I'll be very brief because there's a long story behind each of those, but I'm just going to refresh. I believe I shared with the board in both my resume and in the accompanying document the Franklin Park experience of taking an elementary school that was the lowest achieving school in the county out of 27 schools. And over the 5 years, in fact, beginning with year 2 and then into 3, 4, and continuing all the way through year 5, actually moved that school to 2nd, 3rd, and sometimes the highest reading and math scores in that particular district. I didn't do that. The teachers did. It was really pretty remarkable to watch and be a part of. Lee Middle School was yet another experience where the school was at risk, not so much academically as socially. It was a violent school. It was on the news 5 nights in a row. Fights, assaults, arrests, drugs, weapons. And I was given the opportunity to go to that school and assist with getting it back on track. And within a year, we were able to take that same group of middle schoolers, 8th grade gone, new 6th grade in. We were able to take them virtually anywhere in and out of the county, and people would comment that it was one of the best group of middle school students they'd ever seen. But we had a lot of work to do. to get that behavior not only under our control, but to get the students so that they were self-monitoring their own behavior as well. And then finally, in my role in that particular county as director of curriculum, when the school grades first came out, the district had 9 DNF schools. My job was retitled to be director of curriculum and school improvement. And the superintendent asked for me to take the 9 DNF schools and work with them to turn them around. I just shared my knowledge and experience, did a lot of coaching, talking, presenting the research to the faculty. And by the end of that year, all 9 schools were either A, B, or C schools. So I guess, Mrs. Miller, the short answer is, yeah, I've been involved in in working with underperforming schools for a significant part of my career.
Yes, you have. The last group of questions. What are your views on state and national accountability programs? What is the role and value of assessment instruments in school systems today? And what types of assessments do you believe are most effective and why?
My views on the national and state accountability programs are really simple. And with these, I choose not to mince with words. While I find them philosophically noble, I find them to be somewhere between ineffective and outright harmful to children. Harmful because I believe it's wrong to take the results of one test given on one day and say to a student, you will not graduate or you will not be promoted based on the performance on that test. Even given multiple chances at the high school level, the students face the same test under similar conditions. And while we know that there are some students that are falling short on their knowledge base, and that's our problem that we need to deal with, there are also some students who literally cannot cope with the testing environment. And there is no alternative for those children. The irony is that at the 3rd grade level, where they're retained if they don't pass the test, there is an alternative for those children, in that if a teacher can document through appropriate performance measures that the student really is reading at or near grade level, that student can be promoted. We do not have that option at the high school level, and I believe it's a mistake. So I'm not enamored with either the state or the national accountability programs because I find them somewhat overly punitive. However, what is the role of assessment instruments in schools today? I think they play a vital role. And without them, we would just meander aimlessly down a road of instruction, not knowing whether or not what we were doing was effective. So we really do rely on good assessments. By good assessments leads me to the next. What type of assessments do I believe are effective? I believe that some paper pencil assessments can be effective for measuring certain kinds of learning. But writing assessments, performance-based assessments, doing projects and models, getting kids hands-on, having them actually demonstrate that they can do something with what they know is a much more powerful form of assessment than simply taking a test. We know from Daggett's work on Bloom's taxonomy and then the application model combined that quadrant D learning needs to be accompanied by quadrant D assessments. So if we're going to have instruction that is high on Bloom's taxonomy and high on the relevancy scale and application, our assessments need to be built that way as well, which means they need to be complex and multifaceted assessments where kids actually do something with their knowledge.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Did we meet the timeline? Oh,
I think
okay.
we're doing quite well, aren't we?
We are doing well. The next subject area is planning, and Mrs. Messina has those questions.
Thank you. Doug, how do you set goals for yourself and your staff? How do you hold yourself and your staff accountable?
My goal-setting process is really pretty basic. I analyze the data. If my goal is related to student achievement, in which one goal is, I pull up the data. How did our kids do? What do the school grades look like? What does the overall performance of our kids look like in reading, writing, math, science? What are the measurables? How did we do this year on the SAT? The primary grades, what do the advanced placement scores look like? SAT, ACT, PSAT scores. Those things, I simply take a look at the data, reflect on what I see, look at multiple year trend lines. 1 year's worth of data doesn't tell me much. 2 years may give me a little bit. 3 or 4 years is better because data vacillates and varies from year to year. So I try to look at data across multiple years, analyze that, interpret what it means, and then set a goal for that area that's aligned with our overall mission or vision. In areas where there isn't test data, and I look at it, one of the goals I had last year was to focus on habit 5, seek first to understand, then be understood. So in that case, I went to my 360 survey. And while looking at it as a whole and looking for improvements, I focused on that particular habit and the feedback that I got on that particular habit. Did a comparison over the last 2 years to see whether or not the most of the time and nearly all of the time were the most frequent indicators. The goal I set for myself is that 90% or more of the respondents will indicate that it's either nearly all of the time or most of the time in the top 2. I also look at that data and try to find the 2 areas where I have my lowest scores, even if they may be acceptable by our standards, which means acceptable for us as administrators if 80% of the responses are at the top, on the top 2 responses, nearly all the time, most of the time, then that's successful. But if my responses are all pretty much in the 90% range and I have 2 or 3 in the 80% range, then I go to work on the ones in the 80% range. So I use the data to help drive that particular decision. The staff that reports to me does the exact same thing. And I know that because we walk through the process. We look at their data, we discuss it, analyze it, they set their goals and their measurables. How do we hold ourselves accountable? I hold myself accountable by looking at my data. And if it doesn't go up, if there is an improvement, that's not okay. So I have to go back, try a different approach, and really think about what worked, what didn't. There are a number of people whose opinions I trust. I will usually go and say, wow, this year, I was really working on this and I didn't see the results that I wanted. You have any insight into that? Can you help me understand what you think might have happened with us? My staff does the same thing with me. I had a meeting with one of the directors just a couple of weeks ago, and she was saying, well, I did my survey and I got the results, and this one really surprised me. And I don't understand it. What do you think? So I looked at it, and I bounced a few questions around, and we decided probably the best thing for her to do was to go to the group that she primarily oversees and ask them, because that's where the majority of the respondents came from. So that's in a nutshell the process we use.
What specific role have you played in implementing a district's vision? What successful and unsuccessful processes have you seen in implementing a district's vision?
Well, I was involved in Charlotte County's initial visioning piece. I actually came in on the tail end of the data gathering. So in the spring of '03, Chuck Bradley had come and had led those 53, I think, sessions in the community to gather input. When I arrived in late June, early July, that information had been gathered. We had pages which had all 3,000 plus statements on it, and then we were sorting it into categories. Where do these statements go? We continued to massage that, if you remember the process, through the summer and actually well into the fall, in trying to decide what does it tell us, what are the priorities for the community, for us, and what should our vision statement be. Chuck returned on a couple of occasions and took us through that discussion, and as you know, we finally settled on student success, ! Captured it. I thought it was a highly effective process. There were a lot of voices. We talked through, we discussed, we debated, we argued, but reached agreement finally on where we were going. It was a bottom-up. Everybody, community, teachers, parents, employees were all involved in that process. And when we ended up with student success, there was a lot of buy-in. And there were some folks who were sort of scratching their head and said, well, how did you get to that from all of this? So as the process was explained and what student success actually meant, ! There was usually sort of an aha. Oh, okay, I get it. I see where that came. Unsuccessful. I was involved in another visioning process at another point in my career that involved primarily the board and the superintendent. And as a staff member, I was privy to watch, but not to participate. So basically, 6 human beings discussed and debated, asked questions of staff, but came up with a vision statement that was then articulated out to the organization. It was understood by a few, but it was accepted by even fewer. So there wasn't a real good understanding of what this vision statement was, why it was necessary, and how it came about. But even those that got that part, it wasn't their vision statement, it was somebody else's vision statement. And that vision statement was relatively short-lived. Within 3 or 4 years, it was on to another vision statement that parenthetically was prepared in a much more collaborative way than the original one. So that's I've seen two extremes on how that works.
All right, we're going to move to the area of school learning plans. And I'd like for you to discuss the process you have used to assure that school learning plans are progressing, monitored, adjusted, and result in positive trends in meeting student performance standards. And, equally as important, what changes would you recommend based on your experience?
Okay. Well, school learning plans, as you know, go way back. Phenomenon that emerged, I think, back in the 80s, if I recall correctly. And it was, when they first came out, it was, what are these things? What's a school learning plan? If you remember, Mr. Swift, you probably remember Mrs. Miller, maybe Mrs. Seifert. We had comprehensive plans back in the 1980s. Comprehensive plans were written rather elaborately, put on the shelf, taken off in June, tweaked, put back on the shelf, taken off the shelf in June, tweaked. So when these school improvement plans came along, it grabbed everybody's attention that the state of Florida was really serious about having a plan that you actually had to do something with. To say it's been a long and painful infusion into the culture of schooling is an understatement. Because here we are 20 years later, and I think we finally got it. And I will say it's actually been probably just within the last 3 or 4 years that we finally got it. Because school improvement plans, honestly, with some exceptions, shared the same fate as most comprehensive plans. They were developed, put on a shelf, pulled down the next year to see, gee, is that what we said we would do? Let's look at our data, and then adjusted. It was perfunctory, compliance-driven, get it done, get it in, get on with things. And school boards and schools around the state were even embattled sometimes over this process. Because school boards would say, this is what we want in your plans, and the schools would say, you don't have any right to tell us what's in our plans. These are our plans, they're not your plans. And it was a combat zone, not here, but around the state. So I was privy to some of those conversations at meetings like FOIL and other meetings around the state. I believe in the last few years here, we have come upon a process that works. Number one, we plan carefully using our data. But we really allow the schools the summer and into the fall to digest that data. We give them broad latitude in really setting up their own goals. What is it that they need, and what are the strategies that need to be put in place? We have also held them accountable at the end of the year for analyzing that data and reporting and looking at, so how did we do, in really adjusting their goals based on the reality of what they do. As we unfolded the PPCs, and the PPCs became focused on monitoring the student success plans, I think it took it to a new level, because now there was a group at school that on a monthly basis was asking, well, how are we doing on our plans? Where's the data? That was at the same time that our schools were really beginning to use more data and look at data to drive instruction. So there were several things going on at the same time. Now we add the CINE plans on top. We have school improvement plans. These now have been pulled together so that schools do one. If it's a CINE school or Title I school, those plans are now one in the same. So there's one initiative to really look at improvement. And we're seeing principals really take that seriously, teachers take it seriously, and really work at making it work. What would I recommend based on my experience? I think we as a district need to continue the ongoing progress monitoring piece. We have varying levels of involvement of our schools' PPCs in that work of monitoring their plan. And I think we can do a little better job of coming behind and ensuring that is happening and that it's constructive and productive. Other than that, I think our process is actually pretty good. And we're constantly improving it. This year it's all going electronic. It'll be online. Data can be downloaded directly from focus. Once we get focus up and going, it's going to be a much easier process, so that schools can really look at, they can concentrate on improvement and not on the plan, if that's clear. We've been very process-driven in the past. We really need to be content-driven. What's in the plan? How do we improve our instructional lot for our children, and use that plan? Whew.
Good time.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And next we have the area of communications and community relations. Mr. Swift.
Dr. Whitaker, what do you think of the elements of effective communication? Do you have personal experiences where effective communication has meant the difference between success and failure?
There's two levels of communication, personal and system. So I'm going to quickly go through the elements of each. I think for personal communication, the elements of effective communication are, first of all, listening for understanding, being open and honest, speaking clearly, and using I messages rather than you messages. But first and foremost and foundationally is the listening for understanding piece for personal communications. The elements of effective communications for a system, Charlotte County Public Schools, is to first know your audience, be concise, be clear, be short, avoid educational jargon, be sincere, be accurate, and to the degree possible, be engaging. Parenthetically, we need to use our technology. And that's an area I really think we need to walk through that door as a district. We have a good website. It's better. It's improved. Looks nice. Great information. But we have to constantly be working the website. It's very attractive. It's easy to use. But it's sort of like a dog chasing the tail. You never quite catch up. And so we have to continue to feed that website. But we also have the emerging technologies, and now we're getting on the fringe of my expertise because I do emails really well, but I'm not too into wikis and blogs, in webcasts, and we really need to go there. We need to start going down that road of having opportunities for folks to engage in ongoing input, conversations, and if I'm the person that you select as your next superintendent, that's an area I personally need to go to work on. It's I feel I'm a good communicator from a one-on-one perspective, whether it's individually or even with a group. I need to move into the technology and be able to use that as an effective ongoing tool with the community and with our employees. Give a personal experience where effective communication has meant the difference between success and failure. Wow, that happens on a regular basis. What comes to my mind is over the last 4 years, I've met regularly with both John and Bobby. We usually deal with emerging issues, the kind of stuff that you want to take care of proactively at the beginning and get it resolved before it becomes a serious problem or become ugly. that communication between us has to be effective. And if it isn't, then usually bad stuff ends up happening. Problems get worse. They're unresolved. They fester. They don't go away. And I would like to think that we've had effective communication over the years. For the most part, there have been lapses on my part in particular along the way. But usually we get things back on track and we get things moving forward. I've seen scenarios where things happen at schools, not so much here, but in my experience, where a situation occurs at a school and communication is not immediately given out to the parents or to the community. People find out later that something happened at school, and that can be devastating to the reputation of that school. If not devastating, it's harmful. It impedes that leader's ability to maintain a trust relationship with his or her parents and community, because something happened, and even if it wasn't intentional, if it was just neglect, the end result is a lack of trust. Were you trying to hide something? Were you holding back? What's going on? So the communications piece is absolutely critical. And I think it's one of the areas for Charlotte County of significant improvement. We need to do a better job at this. I'll add one PS to that. I absolutely believe that our first and foremost and most important communication has to be within ourselves, that our internal customers, our teachers and our students, our employees, are our frontline public relations personnel. What our kids carry home, what our teachers take into their community, what our support employees share with their friends and family, first and foremost defines what the Charlotte County Public School is. And I think we need to do a better job of that.
I would agree. It has historically been one of the most difficult things we've dealt with. How have you engaged the community in education? How did it work out, and what results can you identify?
I've not had a significant opportunity here in Charlotte to engage our community, as at least not on a large scale with projects. But I did have an opportunity in a prior job where I was given the responsibility of developing a core curriculum. This was just prior to the Sunshine State Standards being released. Had we known that those were coming, we would have saved a lot of human hours of work, but we didn't know. And in the county in which I was serving, there was no curriculum. Our curriculum was the textbooks. So we'd adopt a textbook, pass it out, and that was the curriculum. We decided in the early 90s that we really needed to have a core curriculum, because you can't teach everything that's in textbooks. We really needed to focus on the curriculum, get a core curriculum, and then find textbooks that supported that core curriculum. That work involved approximately 700 teachers, parents, and community members over an 18-month period of time. We took our curriculum coordinators, we took instruction leaders at the school level, took parent volunteers, community volunteers. We did a huge recruiting effort, brought folks in, gave them their charge, and sent them out to work on curriculum development in not only the core areas, but in the arts and in wellness as well. 18 months later, and we used an accordion type of work. They'd go work, and then they'd bring it back, and we'd look at it, tweak it, take it back out. They'd do more work. They'd show it to their peers. They'd bring it back. We'd tweak it some more. So it was an in and out kind of process. But after 18 months, we had a countywide core curriculum that had 700 fingerprints on it from community members, parents, and teachers. So the results were really pretty amazing. And it was put into place, and we used that for several years. Once the Sunshine State standards came out, then we transitioned to the standards. What was really sort of exciting for us was we were right on track with our core curriculum. There was a significant alignment with the Sunshine State standards.
What has been your role and experience in working with your legislative delegation? What should the role of the superintendent be in this relationship?
In the past, I had the opportunity to work closely with a legislative delegation. We had biennial meetings with the delegation, which then led to a number of one-on-one meetings with local legislators. What I found through that experience was that the legislators were actually hungry for information. They thought they had information. They thought they had accurate information. But when presented with real data and new information supported by that data, they were willing to adjust their perception or their paradigm of the issue at hand. Once that happened, then it was a lot easier to engage them in a meaningful conversation about the need to change Florida law because of what the current law's impact was on what was going on in the classroom, or the need to pass new legislation to take the state in a different direction. I really enjoyed that part of work. I found it highly rewarding. I even had the opportunity one summer to go to Washington and do some lobbying in Washington, not with our congressmen and women, but with their staff members. You know how hard it is to get to the representatives and senators in Washington, but their educational staff, and I met on a number of occasions. So that was really exciting. The role of the superintendent, I believe, is critical in this. Again, if I'm the candidate that this board selects, I think it would be important, but I would also enjoy the engagement with individual and groups of legislators. I firmly believe that in 7 Habits lingo, that circle of influence is key. And I think that at the heart of the issue is creating a trust relationship with a couple of the legislators. I know there's widespread distrust among the Florida legislature when it comes to professional educators. And it would be an opportunity to win them over. And by being honest and forthright, accurate, give them data, give them real life experiences, and begin to affect at least our local legislative delegation, as well as opportunities perhaps even to communicate with the leadership in the Senate and in the House. On behalf of our kids, we must do a better job at that, because right now it's killing us. It really is. And that's something I'd just really like to roll my sleeves up and go after.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Final subject is employee relations and human resources. Please give some specific examples of your experience with labor negotiations and employee relations where creative approaches were used to bring people together. And I know you've got some good examples here.
I'm smiling because I couldn't ask for a better question. My only experience in labor negotiations was a 1-year stint in a former employment where I was sitting on the administrative side of the support union bargaining team. I was so offended at the behavior of both sides, I actually asked the superintendent to take me off of the bargaining team after a year. That was my experience in negotiations coming into Charlotte County. Having been through interest-based training prior to my arrival, however, I found it fascinating and immediately saw the possibility of it changing the whole world of how we work together as district and unions. So arriving here and finding that there was a enthusiastic support of that process on the part of the board and the superintendent's commitment and the union's interest in pursuing that, it was just a real different experience for me. Given the opportunity by Dr. Gaylor to then move into HR and become the chief negotiator for the district, the experience that I had over those 4 years and through this year as well, because I've kept that hat, has really been life-changing, and I don't say that lightly. My view of what can be done and what should be done in the area of bargaining has changed profoundly. So as you know, we've followed the path down the interest-based bargaining path. And we've had our ups and downs, and we've had successes, and frankly, we've had some failures along the way. But both unions and the district remain committed to make this work. And I think that underlying commitment is critical. And I believe over time we're going to continue to get better and better at what we do. What we've seen in our creative approaches is out of that interest-based bargaining training at the beginning was the formation of our PPCs, both teacher and support unions. Over the years that I was in HR, I met weekly with both John and Bobby. There were times when I've engaged in person-on-person mediation using the interest-based approach where employees were in conflict, and I would mediate a resolution to that conflict. And then from our PPCs, as I mentioned earlier, came really 3 creative approaches, and that was CAPE, the Charlotte Academy of Professional Educators, the Charlotte Academy of Support Educators, CASE, and then the Coaching, Assisting, Supporting Teachers program. So I've had now 5 years of experiences in labor negotiations and absolutely believe in the power of interest-based bargaining. But we have to follow the process. And where we've been derailed because we didn't follow the process. And honestly, we being the district, us as leaders, we need to follow the process.
Okay, thank you. Describe the process you use to build leadership skills throughout the district, specifically noting assistance to principals in leading with a standard-based environment.
The process I use personally to build leadership skills begins with modeling behavior. I can't imagine taking people through 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, The Maximizer, or Speed of Trust, and then behaving out of congruence with what's being taught. So I think the greatest source of impact I have on building leadership is to model those behaviors. And while not perfect by any means, I really try to be consistent in that part of my leadership life. I've found that with teachers in the standards-based environment, even though the leadership training is not curricular-based, that the leadership skills embedded in the 7 habits and in the speed of trust, the 4 cores of credibility and the 13 high trust behaviors are certainly those kinds of behaviors that are needed as principals lead their teachers through the shift into a standards-based environment. In its truest sense, from a perspective of cultural norms, the 7 habits and the speed of trust creates its own standards-based environment from a leadership perspective. It sets the standards for the environment, for the culture of our schools. So we can talk about academic standards on one hand, and that leadership model helps as we move to that standards-based environment. But at the same time, it really exemplifies the power of what a standards-based environment looks like. So now we have leadership standards, and everyone is expected to step up to those standards, learn those standards, and behave in a way that's congruent with them. Additionally to the modeling, as you know, I'm also involved in the actual training, as some of you are. And so that's just another hat, another role that I play. I do a fair amount of one-on-one coaching also out in the world of principals and in the world of directors. So as I visit school sites and I work with the directors in the learning division, we talk about leadership and effective leadership and what it means, what it looks like, what areas that person may be struggling with, or the areas that they're being highly successful in. How do they maintain that success, or how do they improve in the areas in which they're struggling? So it's an opportunity for actual coaching one-on-one. And I think that's a really effective way to assist principals.
And besides salary increases, what rewards have you seen to be most effective with employees that would help them to feel valued and respected?
I think the most important thing we do for all of our employees to make them feel respected and valued is to ask for their input and opinion and their help in making our schools successful. On a number of occasions, I've cited a research study from the NEA that took place sometime in the late 90s. It was either 98 or 99. They asked a statistically representative group of teachers across the nation, what makes you get up in the morning and come to work? You know, what gives you that buzz that makes you feel good about what you do? The number one response was, my kids are successful. My kids learn. And I think all of us that have taught would say that's the main thing that brings us to our job and keeps us in our job and creates that passion for what we do. We see kids learn. We see kids' lives changed. That just rings our bell, so to speak. But second on the list was, and this was really an aha for me at the time that I read it. Second on the list, teachers said, what connects me to my work, what brings me to work in the morning, is that my opinion is valued and acted upon. And at the time in my life when I read that, I was working at the district level, it spoke to me once again about the need to really, for school leaders to connect with their teachers and to push decision-making out, to involve teachers in making decisions, not just to go through the motions of doing that, but to sincerely go to teachers and say, you are experts in what you do. I want your opinion. How do we do this? How do we fix this? Not only now with teachers, but I absolutely believe the same is true with our support employees. We have people who are professionals at what they do, whether they're paras, they're secretaries, they're food service workers, bus drivers, have high levels of expertise in their field, custodians, nurses. We need to go to those people and say, okay, what's working, what's not working, what problems do you see? And when we as human beings are really heard and understood, and then people take action on that, it gives us a tremendous sense of contribution, which is what came out in that survey. So one of the things I would like to do, if I'm given the opportunity, is to, not on an overly regular basis, but a couple of times a year, sit down with employee groups and just say, how's it going? What's working? What isn't? What needs to be fixed? What do we keep doing? What do we need to improve on? And do that once in a while, whether it's with bus drivers or food service workers, custodians, or you can go through our employee groups, the list, and then do something with that information. Because these folks, they know what the problems are. They live with them every day. They also know what the solutions are, for the most part.
Great.
And we need to tap into that.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. That actually concludes our questions. Is there any additional question or anything that any board member would like to ask at this time? Would you like to ask anything of us?
I've really thought a lot about it, and I know you so well that it would just sort of be a perfunctory kind of question, because I know what your priorities are. I know what's close to your heart. I know what legislative issues are important to you. I know where you stand on student learning and our employees and how important they are. So I really don't have any questions. I would like to finish with one last statement, and to a question that I've been asked repeatedly over the last 3 weeks. And that is, why on earth do you?
Oh, yeah.
And it's been asked in different ways. Why do you want to be superintendent? Why on earth do you want to be?
What's wrong with you?
That's embedded in some of them.
Yeah.
And it's really there's a simple answer to it, and it's just it's about the passion that I have and have had for student learning. It's really what moved me out of the classroom into the principalship, from the principalship into the district level, and that is to have a greater impact on more kids. I know I've been successful both as a teacher and as a leader. And I don't say that. I try to say that with a sense of humility. It's just, I've been blessed with good results. What I see in the superintendent is an opportunity to take this district to a whole new level. I have the greatest admiration and respect and love for Dave Gaylor. He didn't need to bring me here. I have no idea why he did, but he did. Could have been perceived as a source of competition for his leadership. And Dave has just brought us so far. We can go further yet. And I see this as an opportunity, a genuine opportunity over the next 6, 7, 8 years to really move this district into a point of prominence, not from a prideful perspective, because if we do it that way, it won't work. We won't get there. But if we do it from a perspective of if we can be more and more successful with our kids, if our student learning continues to go up, when we reach the point as a district where we have 95% of our children on grade level, learning at high rates, attendance up, discipline down, pursuing careers, post-secondary education, maybe we will be able to help some other districts do the same kind of thing, be a point of inspiration, instruction, guidance for them. So it isn't just about us, but maybe we can make a dent in this national problem we have with the public's perception of education. And I think we're posed to do that. I really believe we're on the verge of something significant, not only with student learning, but with student leadership. As we pursue The Leader in Me at the elementary level and 7 Habits of Highly Effective Teens, and we plug into a middle school program that we think will work. As we get better at teaching and learning, we differentiate instruction, we use our data more efficiently, we make better decisions. I think we're really onto something. I really do. I just want to be a part of moving that forward. So thank you for indulging me in the last comment.
Well, thank you very much. As I'm sure everyone in this audience is aware, the selection of a superintendent is really the most important thing that a school board does, and we take our responsibility very seriously. We have been studying and reviewing, and just it's something that wakes you up at 3 o'clock in the morning, and you start thinking, oh my gosh, what about this? What about this? So this is part of the process that gives us additional insight and will help us in making our decision, and we are glad to have all of you here. And we now have a much more relaxed, informal part of the process, which is a brief reception back there. So the formal meeting is adjourned, and we would ask you to join us in the reception.